Hello, this is Chapter 2, Solution Building the Basics. So in this chapter, we are going to take our perspective from a problem-solving approach to a solution-building approach. So in the first chapter, we talked a little bit about, what the problem-solving approach is and, how you would do a problem-solving approach. So in this chapter, we're going to take our focus to compare the differences between the two so that we can learn the skills that we need for a solution-building practice. Now, the first thing I would like for you to kind of draw your attention to in Chapter 2 is the role play with Cheryl and Rosie. So there is a discussion board question on this, so you'll kind of be answering this a little bit more in depth. But I want you to start thinking, what are the differences that you see in this role play? We had seen the problem-solving interview, so now we're looking at the solution-building interview. And I want you to be able to kind of decide, what do you think the differences are, or what do you notice is different in, Cheryl's work with Rosie, or, how Rosie might feel based off of, reading that role play. So take a look at that and explore that discussion board question a little bit more. Moving on, we're going to talk about solution building interviews. So these are organized around two main activities. Our first one is to develop well-formed goals. And then our second one is the development of solutions. And these solutions are developed based off of exceptions. So meaning those times that the problem may not have occurred for that person, or that problem was less severe than other times for that person. So let's focus on goals for a second. Our well-defined goals for our clients are going to be something that is important to them, not to the practitioner. So it is not something that we decide it is important to them. It is something that is important to them based off of what they've decided. These goals will probably be small and they will be concrete. So it will be something that is definitely, certain to them that they want to work towards. And it's going to represent the beginning of something different for them. So we're taking little steps rather than, a big step or just this big goal at the end that seems impossible to get to. When we are looking for goals with a person, or, I should say, when we have a goal in mind for a person and we're looking for solutions towards that goal, that's better. We are exploring for exceptions. So I'm going to touch a little bit about this now, but we're going to get a little bit more in depth in a future chapter. So when we're talking about exceptions, we are talking about a little bit of a time for that client that their miracle has happened. Now, we haven't discussed the miracle question yet, but we will. But this miracle is something that our client wants to happen. They want to see happen in their lives. So an exception is something where it might be a little bit like that miracle, or it might be a time where that problem didn't really happen for them. So remember, when our clients come into us, they may not just have one problem. They may have 25 different problems. With that being said, we want to kind of have a time where maybe not all of those problems were happening at once, or, maybe they see, less problems on that particular day. But those are the exceptions that we are exploring. An example that I could give you would be a time that I was working with an adult who was in drug and alcohol outpatient, and they were using heroin. So they would use heroin at work, they would use heroin at home, they were using it every day. But for some reason, there was one particular day that they did not use. So that is where you want to explore. That is the exception. Okay, well, what made that day different? You've been using all these other days. Why not Wednesday, let's say? So it turns out that particular person did not use that day because they had a friend who was using, and they got a bad bag that was, extremely potent, had other things in it, and that person overdosed. So that was enough to scare them to not use that particular day. Now remember, in this example, that adult, their goal would be working towards sobriety. So that exception was that day, that Wednesday, that they decided not to use. So we want to kind of figure out, okay, so you were worried about this, but why wouldn't you be worried about that on Thursday or Friday? So those are things that you want to kind of keep in mind when you're working with your client. Something else that is, unique to solution building, but also similar to problem solving is do you need to understand the problem first? Now remember, our clients come in and they may have lots of problems, or they may have one problem, and you don't necessarily have to understand the problem first, because remember, we can build solutions without understanding the problem. However, the first step is kind of describing the problem, at least in the problem-solving approach and in solution building. However, the difference between the two is how you ask the question. So a problem-solving focused approach would be, why are you here? That would help them. Then that's like a signal to the client. Okay, well, my problem is, I want to quit using heroin in the example that we just used before. Now, a solution building approach to asking what the problem is how can I be useful to you? So how can I help you today? What brought you in that you thought that I could help you with? So very different in the approach, but they're still kind of getting an idea of, okay, well, what is the issue or what is the problem that brought you in? But the solution building is not kind of focusing just on the problem. You're going to quickly jump into building solutions. So either case, again, your client is going to talk about their problem. And I mentioned the difference to you was in solution focused, you spend less time talking about the problem and you ask fewer details about the problem. You're not trying to explore the cause of the problem or the root of the problem, but you're listening to the problem and then thinking about ways to turn that conversation into more of a solution focused approach or a positive aspect. So we always want to be thinking to ourselves how to turn problem talk into solution talk, because as we get further into it, you're going to see that clients are going to often go back to problem talk because that's what they know. We tend to stick to what we know or stick to that negative. So keep that in mind. Once we've identified that problem, we go into developing those well-formed goals that we mentioned before and exploring for exceptions. Then we go to end of session feedback. So briefly talking about that, end of session feedback usually kind of has two things. We're going to give compliments. So we want to compliment what the person is already doing that is useful to solving their problems, and then suggestions that we might have for them. So what they could observe or do to further solve their problems based off of what they've already told you. So it's not just some random suggestion that you think that they should do. It's based off of what they've already told you, but you're kind of taking their words and making it, more concrete for them, I guess, to say the least. So this replaces the intervention phases of a problem-solving method. So we evaluate client progress by using scaling questions. I know I've said this a few times already, but we will explore this in more detail. So don't be, panicked if I'm going kind of fast through this, but I just want you to get the general idea because remember, we're just comparing this to problem solving right now, not actually trying to understand the application of it. But we evaluate client progress by using scaling questions. So scaling questions are those questions that on a scale of 0 to 10, how do you feel? So we'll be using those a lot too. Some other things to point out is problem solving has a termination and an engagement step. Solution focus doesn't really have this. It is always working at the engagement and it is always evaluating client progress during each session. It's not kind of like a distinct time, okay, we're going to have a distinct engagement phase or a distinct termination phase, but we're always working towards that. So you still want that engagement stage because as I mentioned in chapter 1, if you're going to talk about, somebody's deep, dark secrets or work through some of these problems, they have to be able to have that rapport with you or that trust with you. So you're still doing it, but it's more of an ongoing process with solution focus. Another thing to point out is who is the expert? So in problem solving, the expert is the practitioner. In solution building, the person with the problem or the client is your expert. So what are we an expert at in this approach as a practitioner? We are an expert at exploring people's frames of reference and identifying with people how they can create a more satisfying life from their frame of reference. So we are letting them put their perspective on the table, and we are just experts at helping them get to that point. So what happens if they don't want any help or they don't want to change? It ceases to be a concern. They don't have to want any help. They just want something, and everybody wants something. So even in an example of, the best example I could give to you of somebody who may not want help or may not want to change would be like a mandated client, or maybe somebody in a relationship, like if you're doing a family therapy or something like that. But that person may not be there because they wanted to be there, but someone else is telling them that they have to be there. So the way that you could explore that is they still want something because they want that person off their back, so to speak. So there's still something to want there. So we'll talk more about that as well. And that pretty much sums up how we are transitioning from problem-solving approaches to solution-building approaches. So if any of this seemed like we went really fast, be patient, stay with us, and we will cover it all in a little bit more in detail in each chapter as we move along. So thank you for watching Chapter 2, and stay tuned for Chapter 3.